Looks like another Yegor Chinakhov trade request has hit the Blue Jackets. Let's unpack on today's episode of Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Yegor Chinakhov has asked for a trade. I am unsurprised by this, honestly. It feels kind of like a foregone conclusion when you look at how last year went and when you look at kind of the makeup of the team, etc., etc. Like, it's felt like he's been the odd man out for a little while here, but that doesn't make it any less, like, disappointing, right? So I want to talk about the trade request, what it means for the team as currently made up, what kind of return is possible, and also, like, is this something that can be fixed, right? Because I feel like, and I might be making this up, I feel like Chinakhov requested a trade last season, or potentially the season before. It was Dmitry Voronkov's rookie season, so it was the season before that. So it would have been the 22-23 season, I believe, or the 23-24 season. Math is not. And he basically wasn't happy with playing time, and so he said, I would like a trade. He worked his way back into the lineup last season, figured it out, and I think kind of either rescinded the trade request or it wasn't ever really like a serious one. This one sounds like it's more serious. It sounds like the Blue Jackets know about it, but, is this something that can be fixed, or is this a case of should the Blue Jackets kind of cut their losses and get what they can from someone like Chinakhov? Yegor Chinakhov is a really interesting player because he's one of those guys that I think has all the potential in the world and has started putting it together, right? But I think not as much as the fan base has hoped, not as much as the team has hoped. And also, he's injured a lot, right? He's never played a full season for the Blue Jackets. His career high is 62 games, which was his rookie season. This season, he only played 30. The season before that, 53. The season before that, 30. So, like, in 4 seasons, he's played 175 games, which is, like, to put that in perspective, Cole Sillinger, who has also played the same number of seasons, he's coming into his 5th season. He's played 286, right? So he's played over 100 more games than Chinakhov in that time. So I understand the frustration from both sides, right? Because I do think that Chinakhov is a player that has a lot of potential, right? Like, when he's healthy, he's good. And he was, at the beginning of this season, he looked great, right? He had, I think, 14 points in the first 21 games of the season before he got injured. Came back, struggled to get into the lineup, had, I think, 1 point in the 9 games at the end of the season, and he saw his ice time just tumble, right? Like, beginning of the season, he was playing 20 minutes, 19, 21, 16. Came back from injury, and his high after returning from injury was 14 and a half, right? So I get it. I think that he wasn't 100%. I don't think he was ready to come back. I think that he was not necessarily rushed back, but I think there was definitely something at play to, like, either he felt like he had to come back or he wanted to come back, and it should have been the job of the Blue Jacket medical staff to say, no, you're not ready yet. Or they said, no, you're ready to go, and he wasn't sure about it. But you can't sit there, regardless of what you think about it, the NHL, I don't think, is a league where you can say, no, I'm too injured to play. Like, it's, even if you are too injured to play, that mentality is, even if I am injured, I want to play because that's how hockey works, right? Like, you play through injury because it's a tough sport full of tough guys and et cetera, right? But the fact remains is Chinakhov was very good before this current injury, not good after the injury. Sunk down the lineup, got healthy scratched a bunch, which again, he's not a player that can thrive in the bottom six. Like his skill set is top six, right? Like he is reasonable defensively, but his skill is, his shot, his skill is he's very much a line A type player, right? He doesn't start a lot of offense, but he is gonna finish it, right? Um, and that's kind of, I'm not necessarily comparing the two players, except I guess I am a little bit, but that's kind of the vibe that we get from Chinakhov, right? Is all the potential in the world, extremely good goal scorer, hasn't yet put it all together consistently for the Blue Jackets, and also has been injured, I think, every season since his rookie season. So, like, it's tough. I understand why he would ask for a trade. I think he feels like he's got more to give, right? And I think that he does have more to give. But I also understand the position that the team took in putting him where he was to an extent, right? I don't disagree. I don't agree with the way that he was deployed at the back half of the season by Everson. And I do think that's like a big part of the unhappiness, right? Is that Chinakhov was on the top line before he was injured. Part of one of the best 5-on-5 lines in hockey for the first like month and a half of the season, right? Again, 14 points in 21 games, was on pace for his best career, but his best season by a lot, right? And then it all just kind of falls apart. He gets injured, doesn't return to the lineup, misses like 4.5 months, I think, of the season, right? And doesn't really have a spot for him when he gets back. Not in the top six anyway. Boone Jenner has returned to the lineup. Dmitry Voronkov has kind of stepped into that space on the top line. Like, I get it, right? That doesn't mean that I think Chinakhov's a bad player. And honestly, what I would guess is there are two ways this is going to go, right? Is that he's either going to go somewhere and become really a very good player for, and we'll talk about potential teams in a second here, he's either going to hit his potential somewhere else and make this an extremely frustrating trade, or we're going to see, like Emil Bemstrom, for example, or Alexander Texier, guys that the fan base liked, or some of the fan base liked in the case of Bemstrom, and guys that, could potentially have put it together in other places and didn't really, right? So let's talk about what the return could be, or let's talk about like teams that could be interested, for example, in Yegor Chinakhov. We'll take a quick break and then we'll do that here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that's where Game Time comes in. They make getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices are actually dropping as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. The app shows you a panoramic seat view, so there's no surprises. You don't have to be worried about whether there's going to be a big metal pillar in your way. And the price you see is the price you pay. There's no hidden fees like some other ticketing apps that we will not name here. And they also have cancellation protection, the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. And if you find tickets in your section and row for less, they will credit you 110% of the difference, which I love. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked about Yegor Chinakhov as a player. We've talked about the trade request and, how it makes sense from both sides, I think. But I want to talk about what you could potentially get in return, where he could go. And here's the thing is I'm kind of surprised that Chinakhov is still with the team, right? Like he felt like a really solid trade piece for the Blue Jackets to use to improve their roster, right? Like from the beginning of the offseason, I was like, man, it'll suck, but I think Chinakhov's going to be on the move. What I do think this does is solidify the lineup a little bit more. If you don't have to make room for Chinakhov, then, there's room for Cole Sillinger to play top 6 minutes or middle 6 minutes. There's room for Jenner to play potentially on that second line, right? Like, you don't have to figure out where Chinakhov fits into the lineup because he only really fits in on the top 2 lines. And if he's not ready to be on the top 2 lines, then he's not suitable for a bottom 6 role, right? It also, leaves potential openings for guys like Luca Del Belus, who, is going to be knocking on the door. Jack Williams, who I think the organization is very high on, right? Like there's guys that you can use to replace Chinakhov in the lineup, if not his exact place, but to kind of, like I said, Cole Sillinger is a really good example of this. Like, do you try Cole Sillinger on that second line with Fantilli and Johnson? You've got Coyle on that 3C spot, and, it gives you an option to have someone like a Jack Williams as your 13th forward, ready and able to jump in if, someone like Wood is not getting it done, if someone inevitably gets injured, et cetera, right? So it solidifies the forward lines a little bit more, depending on what the return is, right? Now, the return, I think, is going to be underwhelming. Typically, this happens when a player announces that they want to trade publicly, right? And it sounds like the team has been, engaged in trade talks. I think Aaron Portzline tweeted something along the lines of the team knows they've been talking about moving him, but they haven't had the return that they want yet. Typically what happens is I think the player and the agent are like, well, this is not happening fast enough, so we're going to make it public, which does tend to tank value. Right? If someone requests a trade, you're not going to get the same return as you would be because the team knows that your hands are tied, right? Sounds like they are not in a hurry to trade him. It sounds like, if they can't find a trade partner, then he can, up his value when he plays in the regular season, right? We'll see. I think he's probably gone by training camp. I don't know where yet. Again, we'll talk about that in a second here, but I don't think I think Chinakhov played his last game as a Blue Jacket, which again kind of sucks because he was a player that I liked a lot, had a lot of potential. But he has unfortunately kind of become odd man out, which is unfortunate. Couple of places that I think would be interesting, or a couple of places to kind of keep an eye on. Jarmo Kekalainen works for the Buffalo Sabres now. Yegor Chinakhov is one of Kekalainen's. It was a peak Kekalainen pick, right? They didn't have any when he was drafted back in 2020. No footage of this kid. The on-air analysts didn't know who he was. It was that weird COVID draft. He was an overager as well, so he should have gone in the 2019 draft. Didn't. Went in the first round in the 2020 draft, and everyone was like, "Who the heck is this kid?" Apparently, the Blue Jackets were the only one that knew who this kid was, and it seemed like it was working out quite nicely for the Blue Jackets. Again, health is an issue, but when he's healthy, he's a great player. Kekalainen loves his guys, right? I thought it was really, and this was kind of seen by the work that Don Waddell has done over the last year of and even before Waddell was hired, right? I feel like Kekalainen got fired or relieved of his duties or whatever, and 3 days later, they traded Emil Bemstrom. I feel like, or because John Davidson was the acting GM, I believe, and immediately he was like, "Well, we're going to trade Bemstrom to Pittsburgh, or it might have been Texier, or it might have been both of them. They both got traded at similar-ish points, I feel like, and they were Kekalainen guys, right? Again, David Jiricek, not a Waddell draft pick, so he doesn't feel pressure about him. Gavin Brindley, not a Waddell draft pick. I'm still kind of mad about that one, but it is what it is, right? With Chinakhov being a Kekalainen draft pick, I'm not surprised to hear that Waddell is, again, happy to move him out, or, is working on moving him out. But I do think that if I'm the Buffalo Sabres, I'm probably, Jarmo Kekalainen is probably saying, hey, we should give Don a call, see if we can get this guy, right? Because again, it's I'm not necessarily high risk, high reward. I would say medium risk, medium reward, right? If you get a healthy Chinakhov, there's potentially 25 goals in there, right? 25 to 30 goals. If he's not healthy, if he becomes the same player in Buffalo as he was, for stretches here in Columbus, then it doesn't add much to the lineup, right? The other team that I think would be interesting is the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are, I believe, actively tanking to try and get Gavin McKenna. Because, why not finish 20 years of dominance with Sidney Crosby to just immediately turn around and get another first overall pick to start the cycle again? But they are actively looking to move their veterans out and bring in young roster players, right? And I think Chinakhov is a really good example of that, is probably quite a good fit for the Penguins. I don't know necessarily what I would want the return to be. I like Rickard Rakell a lot. He was someone, I believe, one of my everydayers. I believe, was it Stanley? If it was Stanley, shout out to Stanley. Basically was like, hey, we should go and get Rickard Rakell, right? And I kind of looked into it. The contract is a bit rich, but he's a good player, right? And it sounds like he is on the way out of Pittsburgh. It sounds like they're basically trading everyone that doesn't have a pulse. He had 70 points for the Penguins last year, and the Penguins were miserable last year. He's, I believe, got 3 years left on his contract at $5 million, which I don't love as a contract. But if you can, get a middle six player in return for Chinakhov, then, I don't hate that, right? Either that or, I don't know that they'll give up draft capital necessarily, but I think that there's definitely something there, right? Brian Rust is another one that the Blue Jackets are apparently interested in. I don't like Brian Rust as much, mostly because I'm not sure what kind of player he is away from Sidney Crosby. I looked into it. He didn't play a single minute of 5-on-5 hockey that wasn't with Sidney Crosby this season, which is wild. And so, again, his numbers look great in terms of oh yeah, he puts up this many points and, he plays on the top line with Sidney Crosby, and then his underlying stats are not very good at all. And I hate to say the word Crosby merchant, but I think he might be a little bit of a Crosby merchant, right? So I think, he's going to go somewhere and he's not going to be as good because he's not playing with Sidney Crosby, right? But we'll see. Those are kind of the two veterans on Pittsburgh that I think will probably be in the conversation. I prefer Rakell. He's more expensive, but I think he's better. And I think will fit into the Blue Jackets system better. But, Buffalo's a weird one because I feel like they've gotten rid of a lot of their, better assets, so to speak. Obviously, they've just signed Bo Byram to that new contract. I think with the Provorov contract extension, the Bo Byram train has left the station. But, looking at what this team has and what this team could give up, I wonder if there's something to be done there, right? Whether just spitballing, is someone like a Devin Levi going to be an option? The Blue Jackets would almost certainly have to add to get someone like Levi, but it looks like the Sabres, they're set with their NHL goalie tandem right now with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Alex Lyon. Devin Levi is on the outside looking in. And I just wonder if there's something there. Again, the Blue Jackets would have to add. I don't think Chinakhov or Levi would be, the move that Buffalo would make, but I could definitely see Buffalo be interested. I think a lot of teams are going to be interested. Again, if he's healthy and if he can stay healthy, he's a very good middle six player with top six potential. If he's not healthy, then it doesn't matter where in the lineup he can play, right? Because he's not on the ice. So it's going to be one of those things that I guess will probably drag out. It'll either drag out or it'll happen tomorrow, right? Now that the trade request is public, we'll see if things happen faster. I don't know what the timeline was for Patrick Laine off the top of my head, just in terms of he was the last player that kind of requested a trade out of Columbus. I believe he requested a trade before Don Waddell even got the job. And he was traded before the draft, I want to say. I might be wrong about that, but I believe it was before last year's NHL draft. So, it wasn't immediately, but it didn't drag on. So again, we'll see what happens with Chinakhov. I do think it's either going to happen in the next 20 minutes or it won't happen until, late August, as, there's still free agents figuring things out. Jack Roslovic is still unsigned, I think, which is surprising to me. As much as he frustrated me in Columbus, like, I am surprised that he is, he's still a very serviceable middle six NHLer, right? So it's interesting to me that he's still out of a job. I don't know what the list of UFAs are for what's the word? I don't know what the list of remaining UFAs is like in terms of like wingers, and like obviously you don't get young wingers to be UFAs, but there's still a lot of unsigned RFAs. I saw someone suggest that we could try and get Mason McTavish as part of a package, and like, I don't know, if you could swing like Chinakhov and like a first round and a lottery protected first round pick and like something else, probably, potentially another first round pick, probably, because, Mason McTavish is a very good player, but like, is that an option? And then there's your top six forward, I think that's extremely unlikely, but I wonder if that's an option as well. I don't know what the Ducks are doing. I don't think the Ducks know what they're doing, so I'll be interested to, again, I don't think that's a very likely option. I don't think Pittsburgh and the Sabres are the two more likely options, but I'll be interested to see what happens. The thing to note is, I've seen people being like, this is going to be another one where Don is going to have to pay to give up, like the Line A trade, right? It was Line A and a second for Jordan Harris, but again, hindsight is 2020, right? He did that to not have to retain any of Line A's salary. And they didn't think that they were, they thought they would need that. They didn't think that they were going to be struggling to reach the cap floor because of, other factors. They were, the Gaudreau money disappeared, obviously. They weren't expecting the cap to skyrocket. In hindsight, I think, yeah, probably what we would have done is retain 50% of Line A and get a better return, or not give up money to, or not give up to get them to take the entire salary, right? Chinakhov is making an extremely reasonable, 2.1 million? Yeah. He's got a year left on his contract. Like, you should be able to move him for something of value. You won't have to pay to get rid of him, unless the option is, something along the lines of, and again, like I talked about McTavish, just a little bit there, but like Jason Robertson is another one. Again, you would have to add to get someone like a Jason Robertson. But there's options there, right? Like, either you can trade Chinakhov as is and get an asset back, or you can include Chinakhov in a package for an equivalent or better player that is also, potentially looking for a change of scenery. Marco Rossi in Minnesota is another option, right? Of a young player that's looking for a change of scenery. Could there be something in there? We know that Don Waddell has done work with the Minnesota Wild GM before. Could there be a Chinakhov for Rossi swap in these teams' futures, right? I don't know what the ideal return is. I think that probably we're going to be underwhelmed by the return, I think, just because of the nature of, player asks for trade, you're never going to be happy with what you get in return. I don't think it's going to be as bad as the Line A return, which, in hindsight, had some pros, had some cons, right? You got out from all of Line A's salary. He was fine in Montreal, scored a lot of goals, but only really on the power play, and, was kind of a non-factor at 5-on-5, which is, if your power play goes cold, then Line A also goes cold, right? So I don't regret the Line A trade. I would have liked to get, I would have liked it more if Jordan Harris had become something. But Unfortunately, that's the way it goes, right? I don't think the Chinakhov trade is going to be like that. But at the end of the day, like, I do think that even if Chinakhov stays with the team, I do still feel like he's the odd man out, right? So you might as well just cut your losses. Obviously, you want to get value back for him, but providing you don't have to attach like a second round pick to move him, which I don't think that you will. I'm not sitting here being like, oh, it's so important that we get X, Y, or Z back for Chinakhov, right? I'd like a player as opposed to a future. I'd like a player as opposed to a pick. But we'll see how it goes, right? Again, this is either going to happen in the next 20 minutes or it's going to happen in like 4 weeks' time when no one is paying attention, and I'm on a plane. So we'll see how it goes. That's kind of what I've got for today. Tomorrow is the weekend, so nothing until Monday, unless obviously news breaks. But thank you for listening, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. Comments, questions, criticisms, email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until Monday, make sure you stay locked on.